On this episode of Eager to Know, the two required elements in developing art, creativity and technique. We all have a creative part of our brain, whether we use it or not, for generating new ideas, problem solving, and just viewing ourselves in this world. I am Ricky McGuckran, an artist living in Chicago, and I am eager to know and share with you all how people of a creative leaning have brought this way of thinking to the forefront and how it has shifted outcomes. Ernesto Heen and I met at a 7-week painting and drawing workshop in Florence, Italy. He is currently a painter based in Hamburg, Germany, and also has started teaching art techniques. Ernesto's background is very similar to mine, and our creative journey has many parallels. So your background is kind of similar to mine. When we talk about what you did before you did art, can you talk a little bit about what you were doing before you started being a creative person?
Yeah, absolutely. So my professional career in art started only 2012. And before that, also a little bit later on, I worked as a project manager in several industries, so aviation and engineering and so on. And I was very, focused on that career, to be honest. But at a certain moment in time, you consider what you are doing and you have a little overview. And then you switch or not, and I decided to switch into something else, which was art.
Okay, great. Now that's a big jump. I'm certainly familiar with that jump, but I assumed that you were not in a creative mode when you were a project manager. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely correct. Although I was always a person which was very much into drawing, and also doing little paintings, things like this in my spare time, but never really focused.
Yeah. Did you consider that when you were doing it in your spare time, like sort of frivolous activity as opposed to being a project manager?
Yeah, for me, it was like balancing out my day work, because that came across quite heavy for me, and it as well. As a project manager, you're switched on 24/7 sometimes. If things are going very hectic, you have to concentrate and be always on the spot. So painting was for me a way to get myself out of this mode and to focus on something else, which was very relaxing, by the way, for me. And this is actually how it started and how I came to the idea I might go further into this.
Okay. So did you feel that when you were painting, you were using a different part of your mind than you were using during your day job?
Yes, absolutely. I can absolutely connect to this idea. Painting was really going to be something where I hear and see myself doing something. So really kind of feel my personality much more than being spread thinly out and, communicating with many people at the same time and traveling a lot around different places. So painting was really something to focus, to have a minute space where I work with myself and see a result afterwards, which was really different from my work at that time.
So do you think so that's interesting. So when you have a final product that you produce, a painting that you produce, do you feel like that is a part of you that has come out?
Always. Even if I do work on commission paintings, I always put something of myself into this, definitely. And I see a great deal of this way of working.
I completely agree. I think that's so interesting. I started out, so the place that my creativity sort of got reactivated as an adult was through photography. And I started, I bought a nice camera, I started taking pictures, and that sparked something inside of me. However, for me personally, I felt that photography wasn't enough of me being expressed. And I felt like I need to take this composition that I captured with the camera, and I need to express it through painting, and so that it would be an expression more of me, and I would feel more connected to the end product. So I can completely relate to what you
It's
just.
very similar. Mm. Yeah, very similar to my approach. Yeah.
I recently interviewed someone on the podcast, and she made the statement, "My art is me." And she said that she feels most comfortable in a room like her studio surrounded by her artwork.
I'm not at that point yet. I would
Okay.
rather I would rather say that I'm still searching and I'm still on the way to something. I don't know if you can have something like a goal when you work as an artist, a goal in your art. But if it would be something, I would say my goal would be to see the way I feel in my paintings completely to the purest stage. But maybe that might be a goal which can't be reached because, on the way to this, there's a kind of process, and every painting turns out to be different, of course. But I think overall, I think this is something I strive for in my art. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I know you and I met at a class that we took. It was kind of more of a workshop. It was 6 weeks,
Mm.
and it was in Florence, Italy. And I found that experience to be very, very impactful in the way that I approached my art. I know that we used to joke about it that, the people that were in the class, everyone had different painting styles, but everyone very much universally really got a lot out of the class. But I remember we would joke that people back home would be wanting to see what we were producing, but it wouldn't be of any interest to them because a lot of the class, it was kind of like being in the military a little bit. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It was a kind of drill over those weeks we worked there together. But I really enjoyed this. It was a tough time sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because you were working like the whole day,
Mm-hmm.
literally. And even if you went out of the studio, you were thinking about what you were doing. Um, I must say the results, so the work we did, so the paintings and drawings we took away from Florence, for me, that was a big leap forward. And even today, I often relate to those works I did. And actually, at the moment, I have an exhibition going on where some of those works are shown as part of the exhibition.
Oh, really?
Um, and I've got so much interest from visitors and people that just see what I have done there, that they want to know more about how you can learn really to paint in an academic or in a technical way,
Yeah.
which I'm obviously very happy to share.
Yeah.
So I use this as a material to explain what I do,
Okay.
literally.
So
Mm.
let's talk a little bit about what you do in terms of teaching. Is that how do we describe this next phase of what you're doing?
Uh, it's interesting that you say next phase. I actually don't want to be at the next phase. It's one aspect of me being, being a professional artist.
Okay.
It's one way, actually. My personal creativity and transformation in art is one way, so my own paintings. But teaching is more the way of sharing techniques and experience, because I really like this aspect a lot in my work because it influences what I do on other sides. And so I really decided to work as a teacher as well, which I do on a regular basis. So I've currently 3 courses running every week, 2 on watercolor techniques and 1 on drawing. All those courses are very technical, so I don't teach my ideas or certain styles or something. So it's really like, yeah, how to,
Yeah.
so techniques and stuff like this. And I really enjoy this because I get a lot out of it. And I share, obviously, you talk about art, and there are always things around that kind of influences what I do.
Okay. I have so many questions for you, Ernesto. So first of all, one comment that I want to make is when we took our class, it was very technical, and it wasn't. I wouldn't really consider it very creative. It wasn't. I remember you used to joke like, "It's not today's the yellow day." Today we're going to explore the color yellow. It was not that. It was, it
Not at
started out,
all.
you are replicating this drawing, and it was about precision, accuracy, training your mind, and then there was it kind of turned into, it started out in drawing, and then it transitioned into drawing as it leads into painting, which for me was the biggest takeaway of those 6 weeks, was seeing the connection between drawing and painting. So it sounds like what you're doing in your teaching is something very similar, where it's a very technical, and less of a creative exercises. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So before that experience we had together in Florence, I obviously also took a lot of training since I started really in art. Um, when I began painting, I used to live in the UK, close to London, and I took a lot of classes in London, and some were very good, some not so good.
Yep.
Even at very prestigious institutes and in schools. I took many classes, and what my takeaway was out of altogether, that really I learn only. Learning for me is something it's a method, it's a technique, it's something about the materials and tools you use. This is for me a good time wisely spent, I would say, on training. Because when it comes to creativity, the only impact I can get from outside is really talking to other people, seeing finished works, finished ways of how people express themselves in a creative way. And there, even it doesn't matter if it is a painting or if it's a sculpture or something else. Um, but I'm not so a fan. I would say I'm not such a fan of it. The idea of teaching to be creative. This doesn't somehow not relate with my idea. So I really enjoyed the course we did in Florence because it was so technical, really.
So Ernesto, you bring up a really interesting point so one of the great things about this podcast is I start to see patterns. Things start revealing themselves that I wasn't aware of, and something that you just brought up is keeps coming up, and that is there is the technical aspect of being able to create artwork, which is kind of separate from the creative part. And it sounds like there's inspiration, which will fuel the creative part. But then from the technical, it's just training, practice, and discipline.
Yeah, I see the same for what I've experienced so far. Also in my training courses that I'm teaching, since I only concentrate on technical things, people still tend to come to me and ask what I think about their painting, their work, and their way to be creative. But it always comes to the point that I say, okay, I see something in there which you might see completely different. So I'm not gonna point, or I'm not gonna ask you to change something, because you need to find your way into the painting. I can tell you how to widen your range, to express yourself in a painterly way, for example.
Yeah.
But not. I would never go along and say, okay, you have to because it's the yellow day, you have to paint everything yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I'm very respectful of when I teach, and also when I give coachings and so on. At the moment, I have a good artist friend in Hamburg, which I see sometimes to coach her in on portrait painting in oils, and she has her own language already, her painterly way, which is completely different from what I do. Um, but so we always talk only techniques, because it would be unfair to influence her into my style, what I like,
Yeah.
for example.
Yep.
So because I want to keep this, I think this is such a value. Everybody has a certain way of communicating in their art. So I really don't like to touch on those things.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Would you say the technical aspect of painting and drawing is teachable, like learning French or another language or learning snowboarding? Or do you really think it could be taught to anybody with enough discipline, practice, and time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no magic to it whatsoever. I think it's really like learning to play the piano. Uh, some people play some very simple songs with it, which might sound good and correct, but there's nothing else because they didn't learn how to do great stuff. If you take it, if you leave it by this, or if you leave it with this example, you can even play a vast partiture on your piano for 2 hours, which sounds fantastic, and which is absolutely technical correct without a soul. But this is actually the point which comes to it. At a certain point, technique stops, and then you become the artist, where you put your layer on, your personal layer onto it, which makes it your very own.
Okay. Now, from the creative side of things, where do you think that comes from? Is that teachable, or is that just something that is ingrained in us as people, or is it something that is nurtured by our experiences in the world? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I would say it's a very human thing to do art in the first place. I think every kid, if you see kids playing, they are very creative and very artsy in how they think, and they dive into their own world. So I think it's really something inherent into each and every one. But of course, it changes throughout life. And sometimes I think it was good for me that I had a life before art, which was kind of impacted by something completely different, something very abstract.
What do you mean by that? It was impacted by something.
Well, the work which I was doing before was so different from painting, actually. So the physical way of working, and also the mindset you are in.
Gotcha. I see what you're saying. So when you were a project manager, you're saying that was
Exactly.
just so different. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're
It's
saying.
so different, so that which I now can use a lot in my work right now, because I have kind of a reflection of my inner self, how I was feeling, how I was doing, how my day looked, and how my whole life was kind of laid out, which is kind of a source to me right now, because I have so much more to say now, because there were encounters, there were certain experiences which formed me as a person, which I can convey in a different way, in my artwork. I can use this kind of foundation, I would say, which I sometimes, when I put this into perspective, I struggle to understand how an art student, like a young person which went to school and then goes to university to study art and then wants to become an artist. Sometimes I think when I would see myself in this situation, I would probably lacking a little bit of having a source for my creativity. Sometimes, I don't know.
No, that makes sense to me. Like your life experience, as we talked about, your creativity is influenced by the world around you and your life experience. And so, you and I both have more of that than a college student studying art. So that is going, there potentially is more for you to pull from to create
Probably,
artwork.
maybe, but it's just an idea. I can't really
Yeah.
compare it, but yeah, this is how I would see it. So there are several parts, obviously, to how to be creative and how to pull it off and kind of transport your own creativity into your work. Um, so it might come from really from a source where from your childhood or whatever, or from a very impactful situation in your life. I don't know. It's probably there are many different ways to each person. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. When we look at your inspiration and your source of inspiration, do you have more inspiration than you have time to create, or are you constantly looking for sources of inspiration?
Um, I would say I'm a master in getting myself very busy and sometimes a little bit too busy. I it's funny that often I come to the point where I see myself uh, like just as busy I was before when I was working for a company or for an organization um, as a project manager. So now I'm just as busy as a painter because apart from your work that you want to do as an artist, your ideas, and I have really a lot of it, and I have so many different projects I want to kind of bring to life and put out. There's so many different other things I'm managing at the same time that it's interesting but stressful at the same time.
Okay.
And the stress, like always, I used to say it's just the thing in your head. You make your own stress, and yeah, I think it's good because it's also very enriching. I think I grow with those tasks definitely. Um, but I also have a lot of projects that I really want to work on and want to get finished really. Some are underway, I would say, and these projects are more like that I try to work on certain themes, for example, where I have many paintings on the way, which just take time, that
Sure.
take time to be developed and take time. And also, I mean, some of my work is very meticulously painted work, in parts very highly realistic or very complex. So yeah, it's just a question of time sometimes.
Okay. When we talk about the like the classes that you're doing,
Yes.
do you think about that as a parallel artist track, supplemental? Is it's not a new phase? Like, how do you describe what that is?
Well, I started it last year to work as a teacher because not because I wanted to. It was rather because I was asked if I would do it.
Okay.
And so it was a suggestion, and I was first very hesitating because I saw the time aspect and the involvement of it, of course.
Was it suggested by someone who thought you would be a good teacher, or was it suggested by someone who was looking for the service?
Um, I think it was both somehow.
Okay.
It was very funny actually how it came to because I was preparing a workshop which I wanted to give in Hamburg together with another artist. And for that one, I was trying to rent a studio in the city And at a certain moment in time, it didn't turn out that the workshop is going to take place. So I needed to cancel it, the room reservation I had.
Okay.
And this studio was part of an institute, of a training cultural institute in Hamburg. And when I canceled it, they asked me about about the possibility if I can take over a course
What?
in.
Hold on, hold on. So wait a minute. It went from you booking a room to being requested to
Yes,
teach a course. What are you leaving out
indeed.
here?
That was very funny. So I had very good contact with them. So I went there and I was talking about what I'm doing. And I said, I'm an artist and I paint with mainly in oils. And somehow they asked me if I would take over a course, which was a little sad story, because the former teacher he died.
Okay.
So they were really desperate to find someone to take
Okay.
over those classes. And they asked me if I could do it. And I said no, because I have no idea with watercolors whatsoever.
Oh, it was watercolor?
Yes,
Oh my
exactly.
goodness.
So,
Do you
which
have background in watercolor?
at that moment in time, I didn't really had a background. Um, so I said very honestly to them, so with watercolors, I'm a kind of beginner. I cannot take over a course. It's not possible. I can tell you about something, how to create a painting in certain aspects,
Sure.
but when it comes down to watercolors, that's a complete different thing. And they accepted it and saying, why don't you talk to the students? Why don't you come and do a welcome day? And then you can exchange it. I said, I'm going to put myself in the front line here. Um, but it turned out they were really welcoming and said, okay, we will just try it. And I said, of course, I mean, I can teach you certain things, but give me some time to get up to speed with the with watercolor techniques specifically. So then I learned, and I tried to, you know, become become familiar with all this, with all those techniques, and now it works really well. And I'm still learning certain stuff, and it's really good because I'm sharing along the way. Also with my students, we experiment a lot, we test a lot, and it's really interesting work.
So that sounds like a fairly daring thing for you to do. Well, there's a lot of things that you've done that are daring, but I mean, obviously switching from a career into being an artist, but then jumping into a teaching role like that, um, that's a lot of people wouldn't do that, Ernesto.
I know, but you know what? I think life is too short to just lean back and wait for something to happen because I think I myself I need challenges, and for me, it's the best thing that can happen. You can always struggle and always, uh, run back to your cave and cry and say, I just did a mistake. That's always an option. But going out and test yourself outside is so much better because that gives you power. Well, I say you, it gives power to me actually. So,
I completely agree with you. And I, that's kind of how I live my life is I, I had an interview with this guy named Alex, and it kind of came up a similar philosophy in life, which was why not? What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to fail. Just why not just try something and see what happens? And a lot of times that's where people's biggest successes come is by taking risks and just trying something new that they're not 100% certain that it's going to work out.
absolutely, yeah, I definitely agree.
Ernesto, tell me a little bit about how you keep things moving, both creatively, and I know you're very busy with the teaching aspects as well as the art production aspects. How do you keep things moving?
Um, I'm so my former profession was project management, and I know a lot about time management, how to structure yourself, which really everything falls into place for me because I know how to organize my work schedule and also my week, because I have fixed days, for example, where I'm teaching, and I really concentrate on those days on teaching, and I have one preparation day for those teaching days. So that's one part. But of course, I have to think about myself, my own art.
Hmm.
At the moment, I have an exhibition running, which is actually quite interactive. I invite, for example, students to come and visit my exhibition while I'm there, and talk about what it means to be a contemporary artist, how you learn as an artist, how you keep yourself on the foot, with everything, and how you earn your money, for example.
Okay.
So this is also very intensive for me, but also very important, because I don't really like, especially I don't really like exhibitions which are distant to the viewer, which means, the visitor comes in, sees the painting, has no connection whatsoever, makes up his or her mind, and has no really bridge to the person who created this art. I really try, when I have the ability to exhibit my work, to connect somehow, one way or the other. Um, so this is one part, the exhibition, and then of course you know it yourself. You have to be in touch with galleries. You have to speak to curators and so on. So there's also a lot of time going into this, definitely. And then of course there's also a salesman position that I'm taking
A
on
salesman?
when. Yeah, of course. Need to sell my own art, of course. I need to sell what I'm
Oh,
doing to
yes.
earn
Yeah.
my money, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of acquisition and a lot of talking to people, and meeting people, but also working on commissions
Okay.
practically. So there's a lot of things to get under one roof. So I always say the painting itself is just a very, very thin layer of being an artist.
It is. And I knew that when I got into this, but it's actually way less than I even envisioned, because I figured the painting would be 40%, and it's not, because there's so much, all of the stuff that you just described, I can completely relate to. Specifically, when you talk about connecting to the artist, I know, I have an exhibition right now. So one of the things that I do is, for each of my pieces of artwork, I do a video of me discussing usually the background of and the inspiration. It's usually not about the artistry. And that's something that people can see when they view the painting. And then also the space that I'm in right now, I'm actually going to paint there. So I'm going to be there and painting in the space so that people can ask me questions and interact with me. So it's very similar to what you were just describing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And also there's a lot of things I still can learn, I think, when it comes to this part, actually, to get yourself out, to get your art out. But also, one friend recently said to me, you have to sell yourself better. So, which was an advice I really have to take on, because I really noticed on my website, on whatever social media, you can see my art, but not myself. And people want to see you as an artist, and I've yes, it absolutely makes sense. So I have to work on this a little bit, I think.
All right. Well, maybe we can have a follow up conversation where we can discuss this.
That's all right.
So, do you have a couple pieces of guidance, advice, information that you can provide people who are listening to this podcast for them to move things forward for themselves, or to approach their lives using the creative part of their mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as taking the decision to become an artist is not something you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and say, from now on, I'm an artist. It's something which often comes by accident. It happens, or you see a certain tendency in your life that you say you have to change something. Came across a lot of people that came to this part at a certain moment in time where they then found out maybe that's the way to go forward, to bloom into something new.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes you have to be patient with yourself when you really want to be serious about your art and about your artworks. It will take time, definitely, to get to this point. And one advice would be not to be too pushy with yourself in this point, because even take the decision to be a full-time artist is a big decision, because you leave something behind, and you should not ever underestimate that you are a solo artist then, because you work for your own. You have to get yourself out every day and have to push yourself to become better all the time. So it's tough work, actually.
Yes.
But if you love it, I say go for it. Absolutely. Take it and run, because it's the best thing you can ever do, because it's so it feels so pure when you see you succeed with something which comes out of you, which was made by your mind and your hands and your eyes and your emotions, which is something great. If you get an applause for this, it's the best thing you can have in life, I think. So for me, it's the perfect work. And maybe one final advice for everyone would be never to worry. You should never worry. If you worry, you have lost already, because if there's a problem with something and you can do something about it, then why would you worry?
Okay.
And if there's a problem and you can't do anything about it, then why won't you worry? So whichever side you see it, you have to be confident and trust yourself and say, okay, I can make a mistake. And, the process of painting is just a chain reaction of mistakes sometimes.
Yes.
So you have to embrace this and just be yourself and trust yourself. This would be my advice.
Well, I think that is great advice.
Thank you. And it's not technical, you see.
Well, thank you, Ernesto. This was really wonderful. Can you let people know where they can find more information about you?
Absolutely. So I have a website. So you can, if you Google my name, certainly something will come up which is related to me. But I also have a website. It's artinium.com, and you should.
Can you spell that?
Find.
Can you spell that for everybody?
Yeah, of course. It's ARTIWN.
UUN.
W. So UU, yes.
Well, now that we got that figured out, no, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time doing. This is our first Skype interview. This was really great.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.